Well, good evening. Welcome to America's Heroes Group Roundtable live stream digital media show. I'm your host, U.S. Army Combat Medic and Flight Surgeon, Colonel Dr. Damon Arnold, U.S. Army National Guard retired. We have a guest speaker tonight that is really phenomenal. I've read her articles before, and you are not going to be disappointed one bit. But we have the KFF Kaiser Family Foundation Health News guest panelist, senior correspondent, Julie Appleby. KFF is an independent source of policy research, polling, and journalism. The topic tonight is something that's really critically important. When I read this article, it really became a really insightful point of, as being a veteran, what people are telling me and whether I can rely on what people are telling me and how careful I have to be in what I'm hearing. But the topic is the bill that Congressman says protects Medicaid doesn't and would likely require cutting it. So welcome. I couldn't be happier to have you on the show to talk about this topic. It's so important for people to hear this, Julie, and to understand what is going on in the background. So I'm glad you did this investigation.
Well, thanks for having me on. Yes, this was an article we did for PolitiFact, and that's a fact-checking website. You might have seen it. It's online. Yeah. They check the accuracy of claims by elected officials and others, and they have this thing called a truthometer, and that meter has a variety of rankings. So it goes from, a statement is true, mostly true, half true, mostly false, or pants on fire. So editors decide what level of the rating to give. So I, as a reporter, would look into a statement, and that's what we did here. We took a statement that Representative Nicola Loda, who represents part of Long Island, he posted a video for his constituents explaining his position. And this was a February 25th vote on a budget resolution that passed the House. And he said in his video that I voted yes on a budget resolution that protects Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid while cutting some spending elsewhere. Now, because much of his video kind of focused on Medicaid, this PolitiFact article did as well. So we didn't really touch on the other areas, Social Security and Medicare, really. We looked at Medicaid. So that's what this article is about.
Okay. And what was the finding, the PolitiFact finding?
Yeah. So ultimately, we, in consultation with the editors, both at my place at KFF Health News and at PolitiFact, we ran over the evidence and we looked at what people were saying in my reporting, and we decided to rate the statement as false. And there's a lot of nuances, to that decision.
Yeah. So let's back up a bit. What is a budget resolution? I mean, why is it so important?
Yeah, good question. So budget resolutions are not a law, but it's rather sort of like a blueprint for guiding lawmakers on budget-related legislation. So the House passed this resolution, and it was approved by 217 Republicans voting for it, and 214 Democrats voting against it, and one Republican was also against it. So it's just one part of the budget process. So the House passes its, what it wants to see, the spending levels it wants to see, and directs lawmakers to try to find those cuts. The Senate has something similar. Then they have to agree on them. So this is still an ongoing situation, but this is the budget resolution that passed the House. And it aims to cut spending because there is an effort by the Trump administration to cut spending and to try to cut the national debt. Now, the national debt and the deficit. The debt is the total amount of money that a country owes, while a deficit occurs when the government spending exceeds the revenue in a given year. So that's kind of the mix behind this. So the resolution tells lawmakers basically, we want some spending cuts in these areas.
See. Yeah, but what would they have to cut to get, because I think that resolution was calling for $880 billion. I can't even think in those terms. That much money.
A lot of money. That's a lot of money. Yeah. This particular resolution seeks spending across a whole range of areas, but the one we're focused on here specifically asks the House Committee on Energy and Commerce to submit proposals to reduce the deficit by not less than $880 billion for fiscal years 2025 through 2034. So this is the resolution that Representative Lota and the other Republicans approved in February. So the section that he references for this $880 billion in spending reductions, and it's basically telling them to find legislation to achieve these kinds of spending reductions, is 32 words long. So, and those 32 words don't mention Medicaid at all. It doesn't say it would protect Medicaid. It doesn't mention Medicaid at all. And it doesn't prescribe any specific action on the program, but lawmakers are likely to do certain things, like a lot of discussion, and including the representative in this video talks about some things they could do, like instituting work requirements for Medicaid recipients. So then lawmakers would separately draft this legislation to make these program adjustments. But you asked a very good question. So how do you get to that $880 billion? That's a lot of money. So policy experts and the Congressional Budget Office, which is a group that analyzes legislation and says how much things will cost, they says that if you take Medicare off the table, because President Trump and others have said that they're not going to touch Medicare, Social Security, and President Trump has also said he doesn't want to touch Medicaid. But if you took Medicaid out of the bargain, you got to remember, Energy and Commerce oversees Medicaid and Medicare. But if you take Medicare, I'm sorry, I misspoke. If you take Medicare out of the equation, there's not enough left under the rest of the committee's jurisdiction to make these kinds of cuts unless they substantially reduce Medicaid spending. And that's where this gets very interesting, because they oversee about $8.8 trillion in spending under the committee's purview over that 10-year period. And Medicaid alone accounts for $8.2 trillion, or 93% of that money. So one of the people that I spoke with was actually a person from KFF Health News. And she said, KFF, the policy program, said that even if the committee eliminated all of the non-Medicaid and non-Medicare spending, they would still have to cut. If they eliminated everything else under their purview, they would still have to cut Medicaid by well over $700 billion. So they could eliminate everything else from their committee's jurisdiction and then still have to make a lot of Medicaid cuts.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because it's almost 880 billion is almost 1 trillion, right? And you're talking about 8.8 trillion total and 8.2 trillion. That's 93% of that. That math doesn't add up.
Right.
You end up with 0.6, so 0.6 billion, $600 billion when you're just trying to cut 880 billion. It doesn't add up. So just the math needs to be looked at. But what did the congressman say?
There's a lot of zeros there. What did he say?
A lot of zeros there.
Yeah, a lot of zeros there. Yeah, we always ask in PolitiFact pieces, we always go to the source and say, hey, what did you base your statement on? What kind of, what kind of statistics or whatever can you give us? What's your response? So we asked his office for that, and they did write us back. They sent us a statement from him. And this is a direct quote. He said that the budget resolution makes no cuts to those programs, meaning Medicaid, Medicare, or Social Security. But he said, rather, quote, it opens the door to protect Medicaid with common sense solutions which ensure its availability for those Americans who qualify, including, he said, the removal of illegals, and that was his term, from the rolls, work requirements for able-bodied adults, and the elimination of waste, fraud, and abuse. So that's what he said, that this ultimately, this will protect Medicaid in his mind through those actions.
Yeah, one of the fears I have about this, because I was the director for the Illinois Department of Public Health, so I'm familiar with Medicare, Medicaid, and those kinds of expenditures. And one of the things that people have to realize is that Medicaid, most of the money from Medicaid is covering people who are senior citizens who are in long-term care facilities or nursing homes, and also people with disabilities. Many of our veterans came back with one arm, missing one leg, both legs. They actually had to go through VOC programs, to get rehab in order to do anything, right? And the thing that really disturbs me is that if you cut Medicaid, this is the lifeblood for these people in order for them to even exist, and they were talking about work requirements too. And, how are you going to get a work requirement from someone who is with Alzheimer's disease in a nursing home? I mean, it's just, it's just, it's unimaginable to me how you could put those requirements in that type of situation where most of the money that's from Medicaid is actually going to that particular group of people. And so there's some nuances in here that are really very, very scary. And if you say that those people who are in nursing homes don't require, don't deserve it, don't require it, or involved with fraud, waste, and abuse, I'm very scared about what's going to happen on a human level, to people who are dependent on these programs. And
I think, yeah, it really depends what the lawmakers decide, how they decide, first of all, if these cuts go through as written, right? So, and then how they would try to achieve them. So, and as you pointed out, Medicaid is huge. Medicaid helps pay for health and long-term care for 83 million low-income people in the United States. So it's one-fifth of healthcare spending, and more than half of the spending for long-term care, the seniors and others who are in long-term care. And it's a large share of state budgets. It's often the first or second biggest part of the budget behind schools sometimes, and sometimes not. Sometimes it's the biggest part. So it's a big chunk of spending. It's a federal state program. The feds give the states money, and it's based on this complicated formula, et cetera, et cetera. And the states get to decide a lot of ways who they're going to cover, what they're going to cover. There's mandatory populations, and then there's less mandatory, and there's the group that was expanded by the Affordable Care Act into Medicaid eligibility are low-income adults without dependent children. There are still, I think, I'm trying to remember the exact number. I think it's about a dozen, it might only be 11 states that haven't expanded Medicaid to that population. So for that population, they can have no income. They can be very, very poor and not qualify for Medicaid unless they meet another part of the program's requirements, like maybe they're pregnant or they have dependent children. So those are the folks that were in the expansion program. But a lot of states do cover them. A lot of states cover adults that don't have kids, and that's where you start hearing about this work requirement situation where they want everybody to be working, and they often point that out. Now, fact is, most people on Medicaid already have jobs. So the savings, I think somebody told me the savings, if they put in work requirements, would really only about 100 million. So that's still not going to get you to the $880 billion. So it was about 100 billion. So it wouldn't save enough money. But this program covers children, pregnant women, adults with children, seniors in nursing homes, and veterans. Veterans can be eligible for Medicaid coverage if they meet their state's income and resource requirements. So it covers a very broad swath of America. And I think the polls show that it's pretty popular. And I think there are already people very worried about what this might mean. So what might this mean? So they could maybe put work requirements in, but it's not going to yield that level of savings. And other cuts have been suggested. So some of the Republicans have suggested maybe capping federal spending per enrollee, like say, we'll give your state X amount per enrollee, and that's it. Instead of this more complicated formula based on spending and enrollment numbers, or reduce the federal matching dollars. Instead of giving you, a 50% match or a 60% match, we'll make a lower match, or eliminating some ways that states raise money to help pay for their share of the program. But all of these things could force states to maybe cut spending, right? If they can't come up with some other way to offset these types of cuts, or find new revenue sources. Maybe they would need to find other, taxes or other ways to raise money if they wanted to keep their Medicaid programs without reducing benefits for enrollees. So these are all the things that could possibly happen, depending on whether that dollar amount stays the same, and then what kind of legislation the lawmakers pass to try to achieve it.
Yes, that's very, very insightful. And one of the fears too is that you're talking about the Medicaid for people who are already working. It's almost like it's supplementing them to give them the ability to live and to thrive, right, and to have their family taken care of. And that, so it's really, many people are working on minimum wage. They're very low income jobs, but they're still working. And that is something that I'd rather put my money into that family than into a Tesla. But I'm not going to go, and that's too far into that extreme. But I think that this is something that's really the undergird of what it means to be an American citizen, to take care of the people who are here. That's really what our Constitution was founded upon. That there are checks and balances, between the first, second, and third article, from the, for Congress, president, and the, judicial body, the Supreme Court. But they need to really start looking at this and making sure that people are protected. And there are reasons why, things can't be passed that are unconstitutional. That the separation of powers exists for a reason, for a balance, so that no particular group has so much power it can become a dictator or a king of England, right? To upset the living conditions of the people who are in the country. So I think people have to really understand what's going on. And so what was the why was it rated as false? The statement that was made by Senator Lakota.
Well, there were a number of reasons. First of all, it wouldn't actually, there's no wording in it that actually protects the Medicaid program. It doesn't say, oh yeah, but you got to protect X, Y, and Z parts of Medicaid. Right. So that was the main reason. There are also other nuances. Representative Lalota said he was working to protect the program, and he suggested that undocumented people were swelling the rolls, which is also not correct. The states, a number of states, including New York, for example, offer coverage to children or adults regardless of their immigration status, but they can only use state money to pay for such programs. So states cannot use federal funding to cover undocumented immigrants. So removing them won't do anything for these deficit reduction targets. So that was another part of the thought process that went in here that's not exactly correct. He also wanted the work requirements, as we mentioned. And again, that's not going to quite get the savings that this would call for. So then it would require other cuts by the states. So I think the bottom line is the math doesn't add up, as you said earlier. To cut $880 billion from that committee's jurisdiction without affecting Medicaid's funding substantially is not correct. And then the states and others would have to make some decisions that would likely mean cutting benefits or finding other ways to raise revenue or affecting state budgets negatively. So those are all things that went into the decision-making process on this.
Yeah, and you made one comment there. It was in the article is really good. I encourage people to read your articles, not just this one, but all of them. But this one is really salient. But you were mentioning that the states cannot use federal funding to cover undocumented immigrants from one of the contributors, Burns. But that was really an interesting statement because that sort of has something to do with the deficit reduction.
Right. Well, that's correct. They because states have to use the handful of states that do cover undocumented immigrants in Medicaid need to use state money. They can't use federal money. So if this effort, which it is, the House budget resolution is aimed at cutting federal spending. It's not going to cut federal spending if those states stopped providing coverage to the undocumented because they're using state funds already. So let's back up just a little bit. So in general, undocumented immigrants are largely not eligible for federally funded programs like Medicaid, but there are a few exceptions for things like emergency services. And then, like I mentioned, these certain state funded programs. So there are some emergency programs, like maybe somebody giving birth that would be covered, but not in general. In general, most undocumented immigrants are not eligible for Medicaid.
Yes. And then, there's one other thing that was really interesting. It was really there was an opposition to Medicaid cuts that happened before, and that was
That's right.
in 2017 you were mentioning the Affordable
That's
Care
right.
Act.
That's right. I think that shows that people were the lawmakers were very concerned about what it might mean if they cut Medicaid. So this was back in 2017. There was an attempt. Remember, there was an attempt to repeal. There were many attempts, but one of the attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act. There were some significant cuts to Medicaid in that proposal, and then it got voted down. And I think that some folks now think that that might happen again here because Medicaid is a very important part of a lot of districts, especially right now. There are a lot of Republican-leaning districts where there are a lot of people on Medicaid, and so these lawmakers know that. They know their constituents are relying on this program. So I think it makes it challenging for them to do drastic cuts. So perhaps this budget number will be moderated, and or we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. But yes, definitely back in 2017, that was one of the reasons why that repeal and replace thing on the Affordable Care Act did not pass.
That's really interesting because with the timing of it, because we're moving towards the 2026 midterms, and this legislation and things that are being decided right now are happening at lightning speed. Sometimes with a sledgehammer. I haven't seen too many scalpels, but that may be something that legislators have to be careful about because they're going to directly affect the lives of their constituency.
Right, and they're gonna hear from them. I think that some of the folks I interviewed said that lawmakers already are hearing from people who are very worried about their parents in a nursing home. Is that funding going to continue? What might happen to these programs? What might happen to other things like that? Now, remember I mentioned the expanded eligibility for Medicaid, and this allowed a number of people who weren't eligible before to qualify. Those very folks that were below the poverty level in some cases, or very, very low income, couldn't qualify before. Now they are, but if the number of states, I'm blanking on the number, I could look it up, but half dozen or so, maybe 9, maybe a half dozen or so, have trigger rules that if the federal government reduces the matching rate that it pays for those expanded eligible people, they will automatically just drop they would cut off they would go back to the old eligibility. It's like, if you lower the amount we're paying, we're not going to do it anymore. So that could cut people off as well. If lawmakers decide that they're going to reduce the matching rate to these states for this expanded population, those programs could go away in a number of states.
Yeah, and one thing that's really interesting to me is that as we're, as laws are being passed and we're asked to pay taxes and, pay into a system, it's because we have met our side of a bargain or an agreement that, we have paid our taxes into this system for a particular purpose. And, that may be, supporting Medicaid and then Medicare. And we're actually getting money, automatically withdrawn from our checks, for those services. And it's almost like you're breaking the contract with the American people. And, one of the things that was mentioned in the article about, that Medicare is generally considered a third rail because of its beneficiaries a powerful voting bloc. And that is something that I think I'm hoping that people sort of wake up and are informed about what exactly is happening. Another thing that's really not happening is the transparency. We don't really know what is being done in these agencies and departments. We had 300 people let go from, I think, the Center for Medicaid Services, CMS.
That was just the last couple of days. Yeah.
Services.
Yeah. Yep. CMS is a part of Health and Human Services, and the Trump administration is aiming to cut 10,000 jobs from Health and Human Services. And underneath that is the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which oversees Medicare and Medicaid, right? So 300 people were cut already this week from those programs. And some of these are folks that are helping people that have problems with their enrollment in like Affordable Care Act. And so they help them. Maybe there's been a snafu or something happened with their coverage and they need help sorting it out more than just the federal marketplace can help with. So then they're transferred over to these folks that help resolve those kinds of problems. And some of those people are now being laid off. So there are some changes like that. Now, again, lawmakers and including President Trump have said that they are not going to touch Medicare and Medicaid, but it's some of these behind the scenes support services. While it's not directly cutting a benefit, it's cutting the people that help you if you have a problem with your benefit.
Yes, that's really important. And it's I almost see a parallel here. Most of the federal agencies, one of the big findings from almost every agency that's in the federal government is that we don't have enough people working right now. We need to hire, and they've been hiring freezes for certain positions that have gone unfilled for years sometimes in some of the agencies. But there's also a I'm correlating this with Medicare, Medicaid, in that the states themselves said that there wasn't enough coverage. So we had Medicare, Medicaid, the expansion programs, right, where we actually extended them and made it more, more solvent, putting more money into it so that it could actually do what it's supposed to do. And in the federal government, doesn't really give out Medicare, Medicaid money. It's the states, it's sort of delegated to the states, where the states are the ones that provide those the funds, directly to people. So I'm wondering, is anyone looking at, how those will affect certain states? There are states that did not have expansion, that did not go into the expansion prospect. So people were actually suffering a little bit more in those states where they knew they needed more money to have things, medical care, access to care, those kinds of things. And now this is going to be even cutting off that lifeline that wasn't really there.
Right. It's going to affect different states in different ways. And, each state's going to have to try to figure out if these cuts go through, what they're going to do with their own budgets and how they're going to try to make up the difference.
Yeah. So we have 1 minute to go, less than a minute to go. I'm hearing the music in the background. But Julie, I could talk to you all night long with this about these issues because you are really knowledgeable on this. I just wanted to say, reporters are getting a lot of pushback and evil things said about them. I'm just happy as an American citizen, as a veteran, to have a reporter like you that's out there trying to inform us. And that First Amendment right, I'm so glad that you are a proponent of it.
Well, thanks for having me on your show. I really appreciate talking with you.
Welcome to